ever stared into the soulful eyes of your furry friend and wondered, what exactly makes that kibble so darn tasty? The answer, my pet-loving companions, might surprise you. It all starts with a tiny but mighty seed bursting with potential, the humble legume. Today we're peeling back the layers on the fascinating world of pet food and the heroes behind it, our farmers.
If you've been following with us through our DCM series, buckle in for another exciting episode. If you're new, welcome and enjoy. On today's DCM series, we'll focus on the farmers that were impacted by the FDA announcement regarding grain-free pet diets.
Joining us is Tim McGreevy, a passionate advocate for the powerhouse plants, peas, lentils, and chickpeas, and the role they play in nourishing our beloved companions. We sit down with Tim McGreevy, the CEO of American Pulse Association and the U.S. Dry Pea and Lentil Council. We will talk to Tim about his background and beginnings in the agriculture industry, as well as his role and work with pulse farmers, and even dive into some of the latest research on pulses and pet food. Welcome to Barking Mad, a podcast by BSM Partners. We're your hosts, Dr. Stephanie Clark.
And I'm Jordan Tyler.
Tim, welcome to the show. We're eager to dive into the world of pulse crops and their impact on the pet food industry. But first, Tim, tell us a little bit about your journey on the farm. How did you become a champion of these mighty pulse crops?
I was raised actually very close to where our office is on a small farm. I'm one of 9 siblings. See, I'm the second of 9. God bless my mother and father. But I was raised on a small farm. And so we had dairy animals. Of course, we had all kinds of dogs and cats especially cats, because we had a lot of mice problems in our hay. And they were outside cats. My parents never believed in inside pets. Unlike my adult life, where we have inside cats in a big way here. But yeah, so raised on a farm. So dairy, we raised pigs, we raised beef cattle, we raised peacocks, we raised chickens. We did our own butchering as a small farm with neighbors. So wow, we were definitely a farm to fork operation. And we also had some crop ground as well, which I own now. So yeah, I'm actually a farmer. I raise pulse crops, peas, lentils, chickpeas. I raise wheat in a rotation, also some oil seeds, usually canola. Big agricultural background. My whole dream in life was to be a farmer. And so I am one on a very small scale, or pretty small, less than 100 acres. I got a degree in agricultural communications at Washington State University and a master's degree in agricultural economics. And that was just a terrific education. I farmed full time out of school for a little bit until, wheat prices went down to $2.50 a bushel. Peas were at 5 cents a pound, and I just couldn't make it. And so my mom, love my mom, right? She shows me this ad in our local paper, the Lewiston Tribune, that said, hey, we are looking for someone to be the executive director of the Idaho Wheat Producers Association. I put on a tie for the first time in my life. I didn't even get married in a tie. And I got on an airplane for the first time in my life because I'd never really been out of the area, and flew to Boise. And lo and behold, they had a weak moment and they hired me. And so I was the executive director of the Idaho Wheat Producers, which became the Idaho Grain Producers Association, still in operation to this day. And I helped create the Idaho Barley Commission in Idaho in the state legislature, and did that for 5 years, and then moved actually the gentleman who I replaced at the USA Dry Pea Lentil Council and American Pulse Association. He was the first administrator of the organization, and he worked for 29 years. And ironically, I farmed right behind the office. And I had a farm radio show for about 7 years. So I'm very familiar, not with podcasts, but with the radio and broadcasting. And I used to interview Harold. Harold Blaine is his name, and still alive, actually. And he held this job until I took it in 1994. So I've been here for almost 29 years now myself in this role. So as the CEO, and things happen for a reason in life. And I wasn't destined to be a full-time farmer, but I work with farmers every single day. And I have 6 offices overseas that I manage and do promotions. We have an office in Washington, D.C., and we are engaged in every aspect from research to domestic marketing to international marketing. And then, of course, we do a lot of policy work in Washington, D.C., the Farm Bill, and working with our friends at the Food and Drug Administration, and a lot of research.
Thank you for that. I actually come from a family of farmers, so I can definitely appreciate the work and dedication that goes into farming. Tim, last year I had the opportunity to discuss particular studies with the individuals within the council. But I know the Pea and Lentil Council is involved in much more research projects. So what research is the council all involved in?
We have done quite a bit of research, of course, on human consumption, both on nutrient quality as well as health outcomes. We've done quite a bit of work on beef cattle and pork and chicken. We hadn't done a lot of work on companion animals. So everything we've done, both on the animal side, more for the commercial animal protein market, and also for human consumption, I mean, gosh, it doesn't get any better than these crops. They are incredibly nutrient dense, a great source of vegetable protein, high in dietary fiber. And on top of it, they're also really climate friendly. And so as we're trying to reduce our carbon and water footprint in our food system, these are really critical crops in every diet, whether it's animal or human diets, if we're going to achieve our climate goals. And, the companies are responding to that and responding to what consumers want as well. And so pulses are a really important food for human health, for animal health, and also for the health of the planet. When all of this DCM issue, this dilated cardiomyopathy issue hit our industry, we started out with not much research on companion animals. And so we were really grateful for the folks at BSM Partners who work on designing some research that would really try to answer this question and this concern that came up with dogs consuming pulse crops, peas and lentils. And so what we're really proud of course, is the research that was published in October of 2023, prospective evaluation of echocardiographic parameters and cardiac biomarkers in healthy dogs eating 4 custom formulated diets. Now that's a mouthful. Basically, we, for the first time in this whole debate, we actually got to something with an actual check. It was a really extensive study with 65 dogs over a 7-month feeding period. No other research had been that length of time or this extensive. They analyzed cardiac biomarkers. They conducted echocardiographic measurements. They even performed endomyocardial biopsies, where they actually went in and took a heart tissue in a really non-invasive way throughout this course of this study. And the results were just really incredible. They really showed that all of these diets, there wasn't any cardiac dysfunction from eating any of these diets. And so that was, of course, really great news for the farmers that I represent, because these crops are some of the healthiest crops that you can consume. They are high in protein, dietary fiber. They're high in many essential nutrients. And so it was such a shock to us as an industry to have this report that the FDA came out with saying it should be beware about these crops. And so it was really great to have this extensive study. So that's what we're most proud of, that we're helped invest in the most extensive ECM research that's ever been done.
It can surely take a village to do highly controlled prospective research. And just in case you're wondering what that even means, we've got a future episode for you, so be sure to stay tuned.
So Tim, how long have pulses been utilized in making food for pets?
They've been in pet foods for, I think we've traced it back to the 70s, mostly peas in pet foods for a really long time. Our folks who take the product from the farmers, they clean it and color sort it and whatever, and then sell it into the marketplace. So they've been dealing with pet companies for a long time, but it was relatively small scale. And then we started to see a real shift in 2010, and then it really took off. 2015, we had the International Year of Pulses that was designated by the United Nations in 2016, and there was a lot more awareness. We had a worldwide campaign really educating people to the health and nutrition and sustainability, climate friendliness of these crops. And so we just saw this rocket rise of new innovation in pet foods using primarily peas to begin with, but also lentils coming in. Peas are the least costly pulse that you can purchase today. They yield pretty well and they are at a low cost point. And so that was attractive to the pet food companies. But so they really took off first. And, had good acceptance of lentils in that time frame. And now today, what we're seeing is this kind of rapid expansion of chickpeas into all different types of formulations for pets, mostly, cats and dogs, of course. The folks that I represent, the processors, are just going, oh, wow, this is kind of fun. They are taking chickpeas, which we consume in the U.S. primarily as hummus, or in their canned form, because they're just a terrific product and their taste profile is great. But chickpeas are not the least expensive pulse. They would be towards the higher end because the demand for those has been pretty strong domestically and internationally. They have a neutral flavor profile. They have a little bit more oil in the chickpea than they do in peas and lentils. Not a lot, but a little bit more. And so it is really attractive for a lot of reasons for human consumption and pet consumption as well.
And just to build on that a little bit, how much of the pulse crop industry would you estimate is actually utilized in pet food today?
Yeah, that's a super hard question to nail down first, because there's no public data available for that right now. But we're seeing here, just from our kind of internal surveys, probably approaching 300,000 metric tons. Could be, 300,000 to 400,000 metric tons.
And has that changed over time? I know you talked about it being a dark day in July 2018. So I'm curious, what was the impact on the farmer side?
We had a period when we had a dip in sales. We were just going straight up to the sky, where really pet food, especially any new innovation pet food offerings, over 50% of the new innovation and new pet foods coming on the market had some sort of pulse crop. They had some sort of pea, lentil, chickpea, or dry bean in. That's the definition of pulses, is those four crops. And they were just on a rocket rise. And then the Food and Drug Administration put out a cautionary note, and we saw an immediate drop in sales. And they were cut at a minimum in half because of all of the social media explosion and dog owners really being concerned, as they should be, when a big scare comes out and you're feeding these animals these diets that include peas and lentils. And so, wow, it was like the spigot shut off. Our prices dropped appreciably below our 10-year averages almost immediately when this announcement, over the 3 months, when we saw sales really, really drop. There was contracts that were canceled. longer term contracts with pet food manufacturers that were canceled from suppliers in our industry because of this scare. And it was a huge damage to our reputation as a healthy ingredient in pet food. And that still lingers today, even though this new research has come out. We still have a lot of work to do to repair the damage within the vet community, who some as early as last week, a board member told me they went into their vet with their dog, and this farmer is actually on my board. And he asked the vet, well, what about feeding grape-free diets with peas and lentils? He says, oh, no, I don't recommend that. There's concerns that it could cause BCM, and I wouldn't feed them to my animals. And I went, here's a farmer in rural America surrounded by pea fields who's telling that to pet owners. And that's a real concern for us. So we have a lot of ground to make back up to redeem our reputation. And so, yeah, it had a big impact on our industry, continues to have an impact, and we're still clawing back from it. And the current research that came out from the University of Guelph, when Dr. Kate Shoveler and her work was a much smaller study, but confirming very similar things that the BSM partner found with their research. It's starting to go the other way now and saying we do have research. You can't malign these ingredients, the pulse ingredients, peas, lentils, chickpeas, and dried beans. They're not the cause of BCM.
Oh, wow. A 50% drop? 200,000 metric tons seems like a large amount to me. I know that there are some small farmers and there are some big farmers. I would think if this happened to a small farmer, that they would potentially really, really hurt their business. And, actually back in 2019, when we met with the USDA, we heard a little bit from the farmers that they were actually losing some of their family farmland due to this FDA announcement. It was really scary.
That's really awful. So, Tim, based on, that observation from Stephanie and also what you've seen in your experience, how did farmers struggle to maintain their farms? Or what was it like, maybe on a smaller, independent farm level?
What we saw is that farmers, because of the drop in pricing, had to move to other crops that were more profitable, which, again, these crops are really important in a cropping system. And this is why. They're one of the few crops in the plant kingdom that actually fix their own nitrogen in the soil, which means basically they actually create their own lunch, and then they leave an extra sandwich behind for the next crop. And so in terms of their carbon footprint, and the cost of production is quite low, and they lower our need for synthetic fertilizers in the next crop, like wheat or corn or minor oil seeds. And so they're really important to the cropping system. And so we saw a significant drop in acreage because the demand for the product dropped. You have to consider that the pet food industry with that kind of tonnage, a couple 100,000 metric tons, is just about 20% of the pea production in the country. We have about 1 million tons or so production, and 20% of that production was impacted in a loss of sales, and which translated to lower prices, which means we had lower acreage, and was a really big impact on our industry. We're building back from that. Our acreages have recovered, and our pet food numbers are back up again because we've seen new research come out. And so we're getting back close to where we were before 2018, this unfortunate incident that we had, an announcement with FDA. We were on a rocket rise in terms of capturing a high percentage of dog food diets. And that came to a halt. And now we're just building back from that.
And that's a great point too, Tim, is that when you disturb an agricultural cycle, like these crops that do not only seem to be very self-sufficient, but are also giving back, if you can change that up, you can actually impact on other crops.
It's an ecosystem, right? It's a cropping system. Every farmer in order, a good steward, they are going to have a good, solid cropping system in order to control weeds and diseases and soil health. You have to have a good biodiversity on your farm in order to make sure that your soils are healthy. And pulses are a really big part of that. And this particular incident that happened when there was a big shadow cast over them with really unsubstantiated research behind it had a real impact on the cropping system in the United States. And it just so happens that this particular crop that was targeted is not only been shown repeatedly over the course of introducing agriculture to us as humans over 12,000 years ago. These were some of the first cultivated crops in the world as humans, and as well as wheat and corn and rice. And we believe that feeding pulse crops, peas, lentils, chickpeas, and dry beans are healthy for your pet in combination with a good balanced diet.
Yes, exactly. There was a study that came out in 2021. They fed these dogs, about a handful of dogs, for 7 days, specifically beagles. And they were looking at different carbohydrate sources at 20% of the diet. So everything from rice flour to different types of peas and fava beans and lentils, all sorts of carbohydrates. Now, the reason why I would really like to bring this up is because you mentioned that there were certain metric tons of peas, right? And so I think sometimes for someone who's not a farmer, we think we may, a pea is a pea is a pea. But that's not true, right? There's actually lots of different types of peas and lentils. And so one of the carbohydrate sources that was used in the study did have low digestibility was 2 different types of wrinkled peas. So when it comes to types of ingredients that are used in pet foods, is wrinkled pea a type of pea that would normally be used in pet food? Or what type are you seeing more that is going into that direction of pet food?
Wrinkled peas are not used in pet food. So when you go to the grocery store, often you'll get the flash frozen peas in your freezer section, right? Those are wrinkled peas. These peas are really high in sugar content, low in protein, and they're still a pea. Okay. They're part of the pea family. We still love them, but they're a relatively low acreage compared to smooth green peas that are harvested dry. So wrinkled peas, they're harvested fresh, and most of them go immediately to packer that flash freezes them and puts them in your bag, that you pick up in the store. They are not used in pet food, or if they are, it'd be pretty small amount. And so what is used is the smooth dry peas, which have a higher protein content. They're high in dietary fiber. They have a carbohydrate component, of course, much, much different than wrinkled peas. Wrinkled peas are high in starch. They're high in sugar. That's why we love them. In our frozen pea section, they're also, some of them are canned as well, but mostly they're flash frozen, and they're a terrific product, but they're really not used in the pet food industry. They're quite a bit more expensive than smooth dry peas are. Just an entirely different product. And so the research project that came out, I think there was a lot of problems with it. It was really disappointing that they used wrinkled peas, which really aren't used in the food industry. And I think they had some other issues with that study because they were using wrinkled peas, probably assuming they were dry peas, that they didn't get the protein content right. They didn't get the dietary fiber right. And so it really wasn't, at least in our reading of it, it really wasn't a balanced diet because they probably assumed they were using the smooth dry pea nutrient profile when actually they should have been using the wrinkled pea nutrient profile. And so we don't even think their diets were balanced. You need to talk to the people who are actually formulating and say, well, what are you actually using? Because gosh, the pet food formulators that we talk to, these are serious companion animal nutritionists now, and they have to meet really high standards in terms of their pet food formulations that are regulated.
Absolutely, Tim. When we reviewed the paper, the diets utilized were not complete and balanced per AAFCO guidelines. They were actually deficient in important sulfur-containing amino acids that are needed to make taurine. It's interesting that the study, a 28-day feeding trial on grain-containing versus pulse-based diets on cardiac function, taurine levels, and digestibility in domestic dogs, was a secondary study to a very small 7-day study that was actually funded to specifically look at the glycemic index in pulse crops, which only makes it more fascinating to me that the authors concluded DCM-like changes when the study was not even designed to assess this. And the parameters collected were all within normal reference range, which means that the dogs were actually clinically normal and healthy.
Yeah, that's super wild to me. Just thinking about how this study is basically parading as something that it was never intended to be, and how confusing that is for consumers and how harmful that can be to farmers of pulse crops. And this kind of reminds me, just talking about research, of a study that I read recently that basically showed scientists are finding out that through the domestication of dogs over, hundreds of years, they can actually digest plant-based proteins better today than their ancestors could, or better than we originally thought.
Exactly, Jordan. And research and innovation is going on. And more we're seeing creative ways of doing more plant-based diets in pet. How about you, Tim? What are some of the innovations that maybe you've seen that you're most excited about in this industry?
I've been doing this for a little over 28 years now, and I don't think there's any more exciting time to be in the industry than right now. The millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, I'm telling you what, they are changing the way we eat. And I know that because my kids they're letting me have it. I think a real paradigm shift in the younger generation really being way more conscious about what they're eating in terms of their health, in terms of their nutrition, but especially the younger set, the Gen Z. What we're seeing in all of our surveys as well as in the marketplace is they have a growing interest in really having an impact on the climate regarding what they eat. And so we see that as a growing trend. And the good news is these pulses are just loaded in every single category. We are just completely nutrient dense, a good source of protein, an excellent source of fiber. We have high folate levels. We are high in iron. We just have this nutrition package, whether you're an animal or a human, that is just pretty awesome. And so we are so well positioned, whether it's in human consumption or animal consumption, for those customers who are concerned about their health, they're concerned about the nutrition of what they're putting in their bodies. They want nutrient-dense foods, but they also want foods that are climate friendly. And we have all of that. And on top of that, we're really affordable. And so the innovation, because of that demand that's being generated from the young folks who are becoming the consumers who are really making the decisions on what we buy, it's my kids and my grandkids. And so that is driving this innovation. I went to Expo West, which was down in Anaheim. Literally, honest to God, 5 out of the 10 booths that you walk by had some sort of a plant-based and had some sort of a pulse. And I can tell you, because I've been to that show before, 10 years ago, no way. It was small scale, starting to grow, but now it's like everywhere. It's in everything. I had plant-based bacon with pea starch, pretty darn good. I had a little power bar with a black buffalo beetle and pea protein to help bind it together. But I took my farmers with me and I said, you have got to try this because it has pea protein in it. You guys just created this pea protein, okay? So you got to try this because this is your product. And they went, really? But yeah, that's really exciting to me. And of course, all the pet food innovation and new formulations that are coming through with peas and lentils and chickpeas right now is really on the rise, dry beans as well. It's just unimaginable when you walk into the store now and walk down the aisle and the pet food aisle, and you look at the back of the ingredients, which I do, and just see how many pulse crops that really are being included in those formulations. Plant-based is where it's at. And peas, lentils, and chickpeas and dry beans are good for you. So they got to be good for my pet. So let's feed them a little bit of those because we want our pets to be healthy. Pea protein is everywhere, right? Because it's a non-GMO, it's a non-allergen. It has a lot of benefits. And we're seeing that happen now in the chickpea side as well. There's more chickpea protein because it has a bit more of a neutral flavor. We're seeing a lot of pastas made. And of course, most pet foods are extruded. So they're also extruding whole pea pastas, whole chickpea pastas. And the only ingredient is just chickpeas or peas. It's talk about clean label. It is the ultimate clean label. There's nothing else. And it's really a great product.
Yeah. And speaking about plant-based pasta specifically, this was a couple weeks ago, but I went to the grocery store and I had a super busy week. And so I was looking in the pasta aisle for something just like quick to make. I ended up buying a brand of like boxed mac and cheese. Please don't judge me.
Esther's favorite.
And it wasn't until I got home and started actually making this for myself that I realized I started reading the box more closely and realized that it was actually 100% plant-based. And I was just like, wow, first of all, great marketing. Second of all, didn't taste any different. So if I didn't read the box, I probably would have never known.
Did your husband know?
I think I told him. I made the mistake of telling him beforehand. So next time I do that, I'll have to do a little experiment on him. I'm sure he'll appreciate that.
As long as we don't tell Esther, she doesn't know. So as we wrap up, Tim, is there anything else that you would like to share that maybe the average consumer might not realize with pea and lentils, either agriculture or the council, anything that you would like to share that you think people should know?
These crops are underconsumed in our diets. My hope is, and our role, obviously, as an organization is to try to increase consumption of these really terrific crops. Whenever people talk about pulses, recently, it wasn't even too long ago, it was on Valentine's Day, Stephen Colbert featured pulse crops on his little monologue saying, well, look at have Valentine's by consuming pulses, and then it's a root tootin' affair and all that kind of thing. It's very interesting. There's ways to mitigate that, right? But we don't consume enough fiber in our diet. So it's not just pulses. The pulses are an excellent source of fiber. So whenever you're consuming foods which are high in fiber, you have to develop the microbiome, the biotics, right, to the biology to break down that fiber. And, that's true whether you're an animal or you're human. You've got to be able to figure out those enzymes and the biology of breaking down that fiber. And when you consume them on a regular basis, and I know this because we have an office in India, okay, and they eat pulses 3 times a day, because that's their primary source of protein. 80% of the population is vegetarian. And so they're consuming a lot of pulses. And so they have built that up. And I don't notice that they're particularly stinky. Okay. And I have a cup of pulses every single day. Every morning I have chickpeas or lentils because it's a low glycemic index. It really powers you through to the next meal without wanting to snack. You don't spike and go down like when you're eating just refined carbohydrates. And so I think the misconception is these crops are so terrific for your health on so many levels. And plus, if you care about it, they're also really terrific for the planet as well. But regular consumption of them will overcome any discomfort that you have. And I think I want to share a poem with you that I read. It's more like a song, but I won't sing it to you, but I could, but won't. But talking about the farmers that I work with. And I call this the Fellowship of Iron and Earth. And it goes like this. We do not seek fortune or fame. We work the land until we need a cane. We understand the face of pain. We feel the sting of judgment and shame, and we do our best to hide the strain of too much water or too little rain. We are the people who plant and seed. We feed the world and those in need, the unsung heroes of death and birth. We are the fellowship of iron and earth. We are the medics of our soil's health, the stewards of our planet's wealth. On the front lines of drought and flood, battling the elements with flesh and blood, we are the first to feel the rising temperature range because we are the first responders to climate change. We are the people who plant and seed. We feed the world and those in need, the unsung heroes of death and birth. We are the fellowship of iron and earth. Our job is to put food on the table. And when people eat, the world is stable. We feed everyone who comes ashore, black, white, brown, and more. So we take an oath to feed the poor, for if we don't, there will be war. We are the people who plant and seed. We feed the world and those in need, the unsung heroes of death and birth. We are the fellowship of iron and earth.
Wow, that's a really beautiful poem. It gave me goosebumps. Who actually wrote that poem?
This is a Tim McGreevy original, written to my farmer friends.
You know, Tim, I can't think of a better way to end this episode than with that poem. Although, before we leave, I'm really interested. What's your breakfast? You had mentioned you eat lentils?
It's pretty simple, actually. Okay. I usually cook up. I have all the pulses because they're all part of my family, but I'm very fond of having lentils. I cook them usually on a Sunday. They don't take long to cook, actually, because you don't really need to soak lentils. You can if you want, but they cook in about 30 to 45 minutes. And then I have them just in my little Tupperware thing, my wife and I both. And then I usually just have a cup of lentils with salt and pepper, a little butter, and generally an egg. And that's my breakfast. And it's terrific. It's our pattern. And I just think and also chickpeas and black beans. It's just whatever pulse. But lentils I'm particularly fond of because they are just a really terrific food. And they're terrific for breakfast, especially for breakfast, because you need that kind of plant protein hit as well. And that they just carry me right through sometimes the whole day because I have meetings and I don't get to have lunch. So I'm glad I have my lentils today. Thanks so much really to BSM Partners for being our partner in really conducting really independent, solid research on our crops to determine whether there's any issues that we have to address with our pet customers. And it's just so important. I just love you guys and really appreciate what you guys do because it's not what we do, but we appreciate all the work that you've done and the things that are upcoming as well that we look forward to.
So that wrapped it up for today. We learned that pulse crops like peas and lentils are a healthy, sustainable protein source for our pets and even ourselves. While there were some concerns a few years back, recent research shows they're safe for our canine companions. Plus, they offer a climate-friendly benefit and can reduce the use of fertilizer.
Thanks for tuning in. Check out our show notes for more information on pulse crops, pet food, and a copy of the Tim McGreevy original poem, Fellowship of Iron and Earth. Also, if all this pulse talk has made you hungry, you can find Tim's breakfast lentil recipe in the show notes below.
Thank you for joining us on Barking Mad, a podcast by BSM Partners. If you want to learn more about BSM Partners, please visit us at bsmpartners.net. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast and share it with a friend. We'd also like to thank our dedicated team, Ada Miette Thomas, Neely Bowden, Paige Lanier, and Dr. Katie Miller. A special thanks to Leanne Haggerty and Michael Johnson.